All right, also today we're going to be talking about the Reformation, and then we're going to be looking at sort of how does this lead to consolidation of states into Europe, and that'll sort of be the wrap up of today's lecture. So why the Reformation? Why the Reformation happens is largely because of the corruption of the church. So in our last unit we talked about trade, and trade was very important, but one of the major things that leads to the rise of the Reformation is more wealth in Europe. The printing press also is developed at this time, so people are beginning to read the Bible. One of the major causes, though, is corruption. And Julius II, who is Pope in the early 1500s, is really part of that corruption. There's also another Pope that's involved here, too, Alexander VI. If anybody here has seen The Borgias on Netflix, you will recognize that name. But the major issue is that the Pope is too concerned with worldly affairs. Now, let me sort of talk about that a little bit. Again, I'll reference the Borgias, right? If you've seen the Borgias, you know that Pope Alexander VI has, 8 children or something like that? So, if you're the Pope, your home is the Vatican, and your home cannot be passed to your children. So because it can't be passed to your children, you want to make sure that you have wealth that you can pass them, cash that you can pass them. In order to do that, you need to make some friends who are members of the Vatican court, cardinals, right? So what you do is you sort of begin to try and get money that way. And 3 ways that you do that is first through something called simony. Simony is the raising of money for through sort of paying for sacraments, getting privileges. So the Pope was doing this, but also priests are doing this, right? This is a nice way to sort of line your pockets if you're a local priest or whatever. Absenteeism. Again, this idea comes from the idea that there are popes who want to try and raise money for their children. So what they do is they put people in charge of parishes, or dioceses, because dioceses pay a salary. So if you put your buddy in the throne of whatever diocese, maybe he'll kick you some money if you're the Pope. What that means is also a lot of bishops have a lot of dioceses, so that they never have to go to all these dioceses because it's the age of traveling by horse and carriage and by boat. So you might have a bishop who never goes to their diocese, for years on end. Finally, the last way is indulgences. Julius II is the Pope that decides to reconstruct St. Peter's Basilica, Vatican City, in the early 1500s. He's the one who commissions Michelangelo to redesign St. Peter's Square and all that. That's an expensive endeavor. So they begin to sell indulgences, which are basically get out of jail free cards, get to heaven for free cards. So you pay basically the equivalent to about a year's salary, and you would, you would be released and allowed to go to heaven, right? So you pay your salary and go to heaven. There are a few examples of attempted reform, and that is the names that I have up here. The first people to reform come in the early 1300s, or in the mid 1300s, excuse me. These guys are John Wycliffe and John Huss. These guys are, like I said, early on, but they also, they sort of see the otherworldliness of the Pope, and they're not really too keen on that. Good. So then you have 2 other guys, Desiderius Erasmus and Thomas More. Now these guys are later than Huss and Wycliffe. These 2 are from the 1500s, late 1400s into the 1500s. They're also really good friends. Thomas More and Erasmus know each other quite well. Now they are more literary, so they come to power. They rise to prominence, I suppose, in the 1400s, like I said. But they also come to prominence during the age of the printing press. So more people can read their stuff. So when they write their papers, Erasmus writes a book called In Praise of Folly, and Thomas More writes a book called Utopia. They both sort of their books can become more widespread, and people begin to read it. Then you have some radical figures, like the name at the bottom here, Savonarola, who is pictured here, and you can't really see his face because of my box, because of my face. Savonarola is a priest. He's a Franciscan friar in Florence in the late 1400s. He begins to criticize the Pope I had mentioned before, Alexander VI. And if you've seen the Borgias, you know how poorly Savonarola is treated because of this criticism. So he talks about sort of this corruption of the Pope, and he talks about how awful it is that the Pope has all these children, and how awful it is that the Pope has all this money, and he is excommunicated and ultimately put to death for his beliefs. If you haven't seen the Borgias, though, definitely watch it, because the scene with him is just fantastic. Okay, hold on. So the most famous reformer that we probably all know of is Martin Luther, who comes to prominence in the early 1500s. Now, I'm not going to tell you about the life of Luther. Instead, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why he does what he does. Beginning in 1517, or 1515, excuse me, Pope Leo begins to want the sale of indulgences a little bit more, right, to pay for the continued construction of Vatican City. So he authorizes a guy named Johann Tetzel to go and sell indulgences throughout Europe. In 1517, he arrives in Wittenberg, and he's petitioning for the sale of indulgences. And Luther hears this, and it enrages him, right? The fact that somebody could just pay their way and get salvation. Well, Luther's not keen on that. So what happens is Luther writes up his 95 theses, 95 objections that he has with the Pope, nails it to Wittenberg Cathedral. He also sends a letter to the Archbishop, Cardinal of Wittenberg, and talks about the different problems that happen. Now, what we need to see here is Luther is not breaking with the church immediately, right? He's looking to reform the church. So when he tries to reform the church, people begin to follow him. So in the 1500s, in 1517 and so on, he is gaining more and more support. Why is he gaining support? Quite frankly, because people see the problems with the Catholic Church, and they agree with him. They think that the church is too corrupt. They think that the Pope is too focused on worldly endeavors. So he is gaining support because people agree with him. He also is starting to say that the church needs to be more rational in terms of its administration, in terms of giving dioceses to certain bishops or cardinals. So his ideas are spreading because of popularity, but he's also smart. He also uses the printing press, which helps to move his debates along. Finally, this all comes to a head at the end of 1517, where he debates the theologian John Eck. In that debate, he begins to attack sort of other principles of the church, not just indulgences, not just sort of the major problems that everybody had known had been talking about. Instead, he sort of begins to attack the Pope and looks for more widespread democratization in the church. And this is where he finally sort of consolidates his opinions, but also consolidates support. Okay? So here are some of his basic ideas. Here are some of his basic ideas. First, salvation is achieved through faith alone. He called this sola fide, only faith. He also believed that all of the teachings of the church should be based on the Bible. You shouldn't have these false authorities, such as the Pope or others, who sort of lead you astray. He also said that people come to the faith equally. They are not just, you don't need a priest to, mediate between you. This is the idea that people should have individual faith, right? Protestants very much still have this, where Catholics maybe disagree with that a little bit more, but people can have an individual faith, and they don't need the priest to be their intermediary. He also gets rid of some major sacraments that the Catholic Church held on to, and sort of removed the other, 4 of them and then kept 3. Okay. The most important thing to see here is that Luther's support is spreading, and particularly, I would like to draw your attention to the last 2 points here. The last 2 points here talks about getting rid of papal authority, right? Getting rid of the church's control over certain amounts of land. At this point in Europe, the church owns 1/3 of all of the property. It's massive amounts of property. So the idea here is if I'm a German prince and I can get the church to lose its land, who gets to take the church's land? Me, right? So Luther gets tons of support from the princes of Germany. And this gains him so much success and so much wealth that if you can get rid of the Pope's control, open up some of that 1/3 of the land, then maybe the church will lose its power, but you'll also maybe have more money going into that prince's hands. So by the mid-1500s, Luther's success is becoming more and more widespread, and Germany needs to be split between the Catholic and the Lutheran forces. I'll show you a map in a few moments of sort of how it all winds up. But Charles V, who is the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, sort of the major leader in Central Europe, Germany, what is today Germany and Austria, signs the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. This ends the first phase of the Reformation. We'll talk about the radical phase in a few moments. And this allows the the princes to choose which church they would like to follow. They could either choose Catholic or Lutheran. At the time, there's no Calvinists or Presbyterians, Anglicans just yet. So they get to choose between the 2 different churches. Any lands that were taken before 1552 get to be kept by the Lutheran Church, which is interesting, right? That the church now, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V is making a decision on who gets to keep church land. So this becomes a point of contention for the Catholic Church. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit. Look at the map here, please. So this map here just shows you sort of where we are in the mid-1500s, right? You have Lutheranism dominating sort of Central Europe. That's this sort of orangey yellow color. Then you have obviously this yellow color being the Catholic. You see Italy is still predominantly Catholic. Calvinism has spread into parts of France, Switzerland, very far northern Italy, but much is still Catholic. This map is probably a little tough. They probably should have used different colors here. But you'll see that Lutheranism spreads very far north, and as if the Pope is here, the Pope is able to sort of send out his missionaries to stop the spread of religion, and that's why Italy remains pretty predominantly Catholic. So we're going to talk about the English Reformation, and we're going to talk about the other Reformations, but I think I'm going to need to make a different